So the goal today is to verify whether or not I have a fuel problem. And while I'm doing that, I figured I would give you a little bit of history of this airplane. Somebody on YouTube asked me about it. Watsonville traffic, orange and white Stinson, departing runway 20, staying in the pattern, Watsonville. So I'm going to do one precautionary around the trip.
Watsonville traffic, type 1242, we're looking for the Bonanza.
Nose down.
3 miles in the 45, Watsonville traffic.
And we're off. Good power, 2500. Watsonville traffic, Stinson 8306 kilo, turning left crosswind 20, looking for the incoming traffic. I will probably be above you, and I will not be landing on this trip.
And
there he is.
Mike is on the left downwind. We got the crosswind traffic inside.
Watsonville traffic, orange white Stinson 8306 kilo, turning left downwind 20. Have number 2. I will not be landing on this trip. Okay, 1600.
Positive traffic mount.
Got a good climb.
We're going to do a right 360 for the downwind traffic.
Watsonville traffic, orange white Stinson 06 kilo. I'll be climbing to 4,500, but staying around the pattern, Watsonville. Watsonville traffic, orange white Stinson 06 kilo, turning left to base, climbing to 4,000. Will not be any factor for traffic. Okay, trying the right tank. Gonna do one more pattern round and see how the right tank works. Watsonville traffic, orange white Stinson 06 kilo, turning left upwind 20, Watsonville, 3,000 feet. 80 degrees out there.
Turning left base. We'll be right over Pinto Lake for landing 20, full stop Watsonville.
Okay, now I'm gonna go outside of the pattern and do some circling. Okay, we've gone 14 minutes. One trip around the pattern, which is longer than we lasted on the right tank before. I'm going to level off at 5,500. So this airplane was built and delivered to its first owner in December of 1946. It was delivered in primer. It was not delivered. It was not painted in an external color. It was delivered to Goodyear. Goodyear proceeded to tear it apart, at least partially. They put in the baggage door, put in half-inch fuel lines. Normally this had the 150 in it, which are 3/8-inch fuel lines. So they put in half-inch fuel lines and changed the panel to the advanced IFR, which is what it currently has now. Now advanced IFR is nowhere near IFR that we're familiar with today. It's going to level off. It has a more accurate altimeter, a heading indicator, compass, direction indicator. But, you know, back in 1946, it was pretty limited. I'm just going to hover out here for a while. I'm going to be going through fuel like mad. I'm going to stick with the right-hand tank because that's the one I had a problem with. And I've got the field made at any point in time, so I'm okay with that. It was delivered to Goodyear. They did all this work to it with the 150 Franklin, and they then painted it their yellow and blue colors and used it as a corporate aircraft. So by corporate, they were based in Long Island, outside of New York. They basically put probably 2,500 hours on it in the 5 years that they owned it. They sold it in 1951. Probably because, you know, it was cheaper to sell it than have the engine rebuilt. Now, one of the other things they did was, I think it was in 1947, I'll verify that, they transferred this to experimental status. Test out the Goodyear crosswind landing gear for Stinson 108 series aircraft. Now, the crosswind landing gear are in use today currently on the air coops. The idea was that you could land in a slip and, you know, crosswise and not have to worry about going off the runway. They spent a year testing this aircraft out with the crosswind landing gear. This aircraft currently does not have it. After a year, they pulled the crosswind landing gear off and put the standard gear on. And then they proceeded to basically have the STC for the Stinson aircraft to do the crosswind landing gear. After that point in time, this one never had the crosswind landing gear. So once they did that, they then, basically used it as a corporate aircraft. They would deliver parts up and down the northeast coast. Now, Stinson, in 1947 or 48, I forget which, they put out a book advertising these aircraft as business aircraft, and it's called Businessmen Who Fly. I've seen one copy of it. It is currently in the hands of the International Stinson Club. I was able to get scans of all the pages, and I was able to put those scans onto the Stinson Club website when I was webmaster. And this aircraft was in it. As one of the businesses, Goodyear was profiled. And this aircraft, an old black and white photograph of this aircraft was included with that. So that, it was actually pretty cool to see that. A friend of mine, Logan Bowles, sent that information to me, and it's like, okay, that's really nice. I actually have a blown up poster of it in my hangar. Goodyear sold the aircraft. Now, they sold it to a flying club in Long Island. And shortly after that, the cotton fabric was taken off. It was metallized, so the Metco Air process. So there are a couple different types of metallization. One was Metco Air, and I believe it had a slightly boxier look to it afterward. I'm thinking it was aluminum, going to be a whole lot easier to deal with than cotton. They didn't have the polyesters that we have now. And they flew it for several years before they sold it. It started making its way across the United States. It started out on the East Coast. I actually had a brief email conversation with the guy who owned it in Boulder, Colorado. And he was the person who put the 165 horsepower in it, the 165 Franklin in it. He owned it for a couple of years before he sold it to someone who took it to Byron, California, and then promptly ground looped it shortly thereafter. And it was salvaged at that point in time. It was given to a salvage company for insurance. The previous owner to me, John Dobby, bought it from that salvage company. He thought he had flown this aircraft when he was young, back in 1947 or 48. I can see no way that he could have done that, given that it was in Long Island and he's basically California. His family were involved in the sardine fishing industry off of Monterey. So he and his son-in-law rebuilt it. That was in 1989. And a whole bunch of documentation was going on at that time. The aircraft had a lot of damage and was repaired. It's never really been restored. It's always had a repair type mentality to it. John's son-in-law died in a helicopter accident, and John moved it from the airports just in the Silicon Valley, in the Santa Clara Valley, down to Watsonville. And what happened was I was looking for an airplane. I wanted a tail dragger. I like the tail draggers. And I was looking for one that I could do my instrument training in. Now, obviously, I was a little naive about instrument training at that time. While this is a perfectly good instrument aircraft, if you have the experience, it is not a good trainer for doing instrument flying. It has one radio, one VOR, no DME. It had a Loran. I don't know if anybody remembers the Lorans, but it did have one of those. But those are not usable for IFR, really. I was looking for a 170 at the time because, 170s are cool. I love the look of them. But people were asking a lot of money for the 170s. This is back in 2003. In 2004, late 2003, I started going, okay, well, maybe the 170 is not going to be what I can do. So I started looking at other aircraft, and I ran across the Stinson. I joined the Stinson Club, looked at see what it does. These aircraft, pretty much do 100 knots on a good day. This one will do 110 miles an hour. And then I decided, okay, well, maybe a Stinson would be pretty good, a Stinson 108. The Franklin engine didn't really concern me a lot at the time. Parts for the Franklins have become much more difficult to source, especially pistons and crankshafts. But, at the time, that didn't seem too bad. So I got in touch with John, who I knew through the EAA chapter. And I basically told him, look, you got a Stinson 108. I'm interested in buying one. What can you tell me about them? He then got in touch with me and said his Stinson was for sale. He had had a heart attack. Actually, one of multiple heart attacks. And he had lost his medical. So, after a while, I looked at it, and another person I knew through a band I was in, a concert band I was in, also has a Stinson 108. So he and I took the airplane up, and we signed the deal on buying this from John. That was back in 2004, I believe. So that required, obviously, I already had my tail dragger, I had my high performance. I had done quite a bit of work getting, familiar with tail draggers, although it took a lot of work to get back to it. I went up with an instructor, Don McDowell, who is a great instructor. He's an old, ancient military pilot. Had lots of time in the Stinsons. And then started flying it. Did discover some problems. Luckily, John had done a fairly good job on the interior. The interior here is really comfortable. These seats are fairly well done. The interior is very nice. The outside was orange. And, he had told me that he thought that the orange color was because at some point in time there was a near miss, and the wife of whoever owned it at the time said, I'm not getting in this thing until you painted a color that can be seen. So they painted it bright orange. I cannot see any indication that this airplane was not painted orange when it was metallized. So that was in 1954-ish. And if that's true, I don't believe it's been painted since then. And only by the fact that it's been hangared and well taken care of that entire time, that the airplane, the paint looks as good as it does. John, when he did the rebuild, also had a single-piece windshield put in. Now, you can't get those anymore. People who manufacture them don't want to do that. They don't want to be responsible for the single-piece windshields anymore. Now, if you happen to have the STC, they'll make you a windscreen. So that's a rather interesting little tidbit. Most of the Stinsons out there have a windscreen which is split right down the middle. And then you have the left and the right sides. So when I bought it, I then proceeded to fly it a lot, get used to it. I do a lot of sightseeing flying. I don't do a lot of travel flying at the moment. But we would occasionally take it down to Southern California, which is just on the edge of the range of these tanks. These tanks hold 40 gallon. The Franklin engine 165 chews about 10 gallons. So you pretty much got 4 hours of flying, and it's 440 miles, which is just on the edge of comfortable getting down from Watsonville to, like, for example, Orange County. John actually was able to get his medical back, and he bought back into as a partner. John was an interesting guy. I didn't really buy an airplane. I bought a maid. He really loved this airplane, and he would come and clean the hangar whenever he could. just to be, just to clean the airplane, make sure the hangar was swept and stuff like that. So I really miss having him around. He died a couple of years back. I think it was 93 or 94. But he was a great person to have around. A very friendly, jovial guy. And since then, I had there was some corrosion issues. The straps that connect the struts to the main spar. So the main spar has a hat bracket. That hat bracket has straps connected to it. Those straps come down and connect to the struts. There are 2 struts on each wing. And the corrosion was getting bad enough. My mechanic was, not comfortable signing off on it. Basically removing the corrosion, and it was getting too thin. He had an idea of how to fix it, and that took some time working out. He was going through rebuilding the corporate hangar for his business. And my life was rather chaotic because of work and family issues, family health issues. So that took a couple years to finally sort out. Once I was able to sort out my life, I realized that I could get a pair of wings off of a donor Stinson 108 and put them onto this airplane. Now that would mean that the air wings would not orange anymore, but I figured out a repaint. I started looking around, and there's a guy named Earl Allen who has made a business out of buying wrecked Stinsons and parting out the pieces that he could. So I got in touch with him, and he had a set of wings. He had a couple of different sets of wings. He had one set of wings that he didn't feel comfortable selling to me unless I wanted to have them completely recovered. Until he had gotten into them, they looked great, but until that point in time, after he got into them, it was like, yeah, there's some sketchy stuff going on here as far as, how they were rebuilt. So he actually had picked up a couple of other wings, a couple of other aircraft bodies. One of them had the frame right around the landing gear was corroded through. And so the person who owned that decided to just get rid of the airplane. And I ended up with those wings. They are fabric. They show some age on them, but they're in pretty good shape. They are fabric. They're white with blue scalloping on them. So combine that with an orange airplane, an orange fuselage and struts, and it actually kind of works. I was really surprised that the look was not horrible. So we put those on. Now this airplane was rigged really, really nicely prior to this point with the old metal wings. So the mechanic, my mechanic Terry, basically said, I'm just going to put these wings on, and it was well rigged. As long as these wings are fairly good, we should be able to have a nicely rigged airplane. So he did that, and then Don McDowell and I went up. Now I had last flown with Don when I got the checkout for this, 18 years prior, almost to the day when we went up and tested out the airplane. We basically did stalls, slow cruise with flaps, high-speed cruise, and discovered that the airplane flew fantastic. It did not fall off. It didn't have any problems with rigging, and it turned out to be great. At that point in time, it was just a matter of me getting used to the airplane again, because it had been a couple of years since I had flown the tail dragger. I've been flying Trinidad, which is a high-performance airplane. Great airplane to fly, but it is not a tail dragger. So then I put those on, and that's where we are now today. That is the story of this airplane. It currently has like 5,400 hours on it. I've got about 400 hours on it. There are problems with the Stinson parts. Univair is really good at maintaining a good set of parts where they can. The Franklins can be a problem. There are STCs for the 0360, for the 108, the straight 108, the 108-1 and -2, which are what are called the small tails. And you can get a Lycoming Hio 360 200 horsepower for the 108-3. Somebody actually is working on an STC to do the 0320 Lycoming, which would be 160 horsepower. That would be a 5 horsepower drop on this airplane. I'm not sure that is a problem. For one thing, the engine would be lighter, and the fuel burn would be so much less. Fuel burn would be someplace around 8 gallons an hour. So, now I'm looking at, 40-gallon tank lasting 5 hours. That would be pretty cool. That would get me to the Southern California area without having to refuel. That is a rather enticing little change. This is one of the airplanes that when I land someplace, people usually come up to me and say, I flew one of those when I was doing my first training, or when I first got my pilot certificate, I was flying one of those. And they really like this airplane. It gets a lot of attention, which is fun. I am going to head back in. I think flying for well over 40 minutes on the right tank is a reasonable test. And hope you enjoyed the story of this Stinson, the Stinson 8306 Kilo. I enjoy the airplane. I've owned it for probably longer than anybody else now. I have now owned this for 18. With the new Mosaic stuff, this is probably going to fit into the light sport category. But if I fly light sport because of the medical, I'll only be able to carry one passenger. But, put baggage in the back. But anyway, I am going to start descending and going back to the airport. I think we have a successful test. When I land, I'll check to see if the fuel selector has got fuel on it and go from there. As I'm descending, it's getting to 80 degrees. So I fly with my iPhone here, which has ForeFlight. I have an old King KX155 here, localizer and VOR here. I have a Stratus ESGI, one of the old ones here that I put in, I think it was 2018, over on the co-pilot side. So that handles my ADS-B. I am close enough to multiple airspaces that ADS-B is basically a requirement for me. ADS-B out. So that handles
733 Alpha Kilo is turning base runway 20.
my traffic, my GPS, my basic, navigation. That handles all my navigation. The iPhone is a nice small size. I used to have an iPad mini that I would use in here, but the iPhone seems to be a much better fit for this airplane. Now down to 3,500 feet, go to the left tank, which is the fullest one. So yeah, once this thing's trimmed out, I'm flying hands and feet off. I got a little pressure on the left rudder, but not a lot, just occasionally. It's a very stable aircraft. It is one of the most benign tail draggers that I'm aware of. I recommend people learn to fly in something like Cub or a Champ. It's a little more trickier, but if you want something that's a really easy tail dragger to build time in, it has Oleo landing gear, which makes a very forgiving landing of any bounces and stuff. Definitely have taken advantage of that at times. I try not to get on the 45 in front of some of these faster airplanes because, some people don't like practicing slow flight. Flexible traffic, orange and white Stinson, 8306 Kilo, turning, entering 3 mile 45, runway 20, over the river and freeway, Watsonville. Flexible traffic, orange and white Stinson, 8306 Kilo, turning left downwind 20, Watsonville.